96% of you are not subscribed to the channel. When I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will share a series of exclusive stories. Subscribe now. The frost bit deep through my suit as I descended onto Ymir. Even with all the advanced tech protecting me, I could feel the icy grip of the air through my helmet. This was not the earth chill I was used to. It was something harsher, a reminder that I was a very long way from home. As my boots touched down, the landscape that stretched before me was a vista of endless snow and jagged, ice-covered peaks under an alien sky. The planet's faint blue sun barely warmed the sky, casting a cold, muted glow over everything. This was Ymir, an isolated planet on the edge of known space, shrouded in mystery and cautionary tales. It was said to be ruled by a queen whose heart was as cold as the frozen terrain. Yet here I was, sent as a diplomat, a hopeful bridge between humanity and Ymir's reclusive society. I barely had time to take in the vast, frigid horizon when the shadows shifted. Emerging from the blue-white snow came a figure unlike any I had seen. She was tall and imposing, draped in dark silken robes that seemed to absorb the very light around her. Her hair, silver as the frost underfoot, flowed like a river down her back, contrasting with her crystalline blue skin that glinted under the muted sunlight. Her eyes were piercing, like two shards of ice that saw more than I could imagine. "I am Ylva, Queen of Ymir," she said, her voice as cold as the wind whipping around us. I nodded, aware of the weight of this encounter. "Marcus Finn, astronaut of the United Earth Federation," I replied, my breath forming clouds of mist. "I come on a mission of peace and alliance." Ylva's gaze held mine, and I could feel the skepticism in those pale, otherworldly eyes. "Humanity sends its emissary. Yet, you wear no armor, carry no weapons. Foolish, or merely overconfident?" I could feel the chill of her words sink into my bones, yet I held her gaze, hoping my sincerity could break through. "Neither, Your Majesty. Only hopeful," I said. "Our people believe that diplomacy is best done with open hands, not with weapons." She tilted her head, considering me. "Hope," she repeated, the word foreign on her tongue, almost as if it were a concept seldom spoken of on this world. "A curious notion." With a wave of her hand, she gestured for me to follow, leading me into an ice palace that rose like a frozen mountain in the distance. Each step crunched on the thick snow beneath our feet as we moved through the biting wind. The closer we came, the more I noticed the surreal, crystalline architecture, each spire and tower carved from glistening ice that refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. This palace, a marvel of Ymir's cold beauty, seemed to stand as a testament to Ylva's reign. Upon entering, I was struck by a warmth that sharply contrasted with the harsh exterior. It was dim, almost twilight inside, the walls glowing with a gentle luminescence. The vast hall we entered was lined with pale figures like Ylva, each watching me with wary interest. I could feel their icy gazes, but none were as cold or as intense as the queen's. Ylva's voice broke the silence. "You will be my guest, Marcus of Earth. While you are here, I hope you do not find our customs too alien." "Thank you, Your Majesty," I replied, bowing slightly. "I came to learn, after all." She nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. "Then, I shall see to it that you learn." Days passed in a quiet rhythm, each one an opportunity to explore both the palace and, I hoped, Ylva herself. She was enigmatic, and despite her commanding presence, I sensed an unspoken loneliness in her. It was the rare moments where we shared quiet conversations that intrigued me the most. She spoke of Ymir's history, its unforgiving climate, and the strength her people prided themselves on to survive it. And as I shared stories of Earth's warmth, our oceans, forests, and the laughter of people in the sun, I saw a hint of wistfulness in her gaze. One evening, we found ourselves alone in the palace's grand observatory, its glass-like ceiling offering a view of the swirling stars above. The silence was thick, almost reverent, as we stood together. Ylva's face softened under the starlight, and for the first time, I saw her as someone not just defined by her title, but as a person who carried the weight of 1,000 winters within her. "Tell me, Marcus," she asked, her voice softer than I had ever heard, "what is it that drives your people to seek the stars?" I paused, considering her question. "I think it's hope, really," I said slowly. "A belief that there's more out there, that by connecting with others, we can be more than we are alone. To us, The unknown isn't something to fear but something to embrace. She nodded, her gaze distant. For us, the unknown has always been a danger, a threat. On Emer, we have learned to shield ourselves from it. But shields can be isolating, I countered, my voice quiet but earnest. Sometimes to grow, we have to open ourselves to the unknown, to let others in. Even if it means risking a little of ourselves. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze never leaving the stars. When she finally spoke, her voice held a note of vulnerability. "You speak as if you understand," she murmured, almost to herself. "Yet, your warmth, it is unlike anything on Emer. Here, survival means hardening one's heart, for there is no mercy in ice." "But isn't mercy a strength of its own?" I asked. "To show kindness, even when it isn't asked for?" Ylva turned to me, a strange light in her eyes. "Your human ways are strange, Marcus Finn. Yet, they do not seem weak." It was then that I realized, for the first time, a crack had formed in her frosty demeanor. Though small, it was there, a glimmer of openness beneath the stoic mask. And in that moment, I felt that perhaps, just maybe, there was more to this queen than I had first believed. The days continued, each one revealing a little more of the woman behind the queenly mask. We shared more conversations, more stories of our vastly different worlds. Each exchange seemed to build a bridge, one formed not of stone or ice, but of understanding and a kind of unspoken respect. One night, as we walked along a frozen terrace overlooking the vast ice plains, Ylva surprised me by sharing a rare glimpse into her past. "My world, my people. They look to me as their guide, their protector," she began, her voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "Yet, at times, I wonder if the price of my role has been my heart." Her confession hung in the frigid air, and I felt the urge to offer some comfort. "Perhaps," I said gently, "you don't have to sacrifice your heart to lead. Sometimes, a leader's strength comes from their willingness to be vulnerable." She met my gaze, her expression unguarded. "Is that how you humans lead?" "Sometimes," I replied with a small smile. "We lead best when we remember what it means to feel. Joy, loss, love. That's what makes us human, after all." In the silence that followed, I saw something flicker in her eyes, a spark of warmth, like the first hint of spring breaking through a long, harsh winter. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And as we stood there on the edge of the frozen world, surrounded by endless ice and stars, I felt an inexplicable connection forming between us. The days on Emer drifted into a strange rhythm. My work cataloging mineral samples and studying the planet's ice cores became a kind of background hum to something much more intriguing. Ylva and I spent many quiet moments together, exploring Emer's frozen beauty or sharing meals by flickering firelight. I'd like to think I was growing accustomed to the cold, but it was more likely that my focus on Ylva made me forget about the biting chill. But beneath the tranquil routine, I felt a building tension between us, an electric undercurrent that seemed to pulse stronger each day. There was a silent battle in her, something withheld every time our eyes met, every time she drew a little closer and then pulled herself back again. It was like she was balancing on a knife's edge, caught between duty and something unspoken that felt achingly mutual. One evening, as the last pale sliver of light faded, we found ourselves in the crystalline hall she called her study. It was a remarkable space, glimmering walls, sharp, angular corners softened by the ice's translucent glow. Outside, snow swept past the frozen windows, catching in cascades of white against the glass, and the world was utterly silent, save for our voices. Ylva stood near the center, looking over an ancient map, her hand resting on the cold surface. I couldn't stop myself from watching her, the delicate rise and fall of her breath, the faint glow of her silvery hair. For all her ethereal beauty, it was her intensity that held me captive. Ylva had an undeniable strength, yet I could sense a vulnerability buried deep within her. Finally, she looked up, catching my gaze. I didn't look away. "Marcus," she began, her voice barely louder than a whisper, "you must have wondered why I keep my distance." "Maybe," I replied, trying to mask the way her words struck me. "But I suppose I've just let you keep that space. I don't know if I've earned the right to ask more of you." Her eyes softened, a flicker of sadness breaking through her usual steel. "It isn't about what you've earned, Marcus. There are expectations, ones I've lived with all my life. I am bound to my people, their safety. To have certain feelings can be dangerous, for them and for me. She looked down at her hands, a sigh escaping her lips as if she were giving in to a force greater than herself. I took a slow breath, moving closer to her. But here, now, is it so wrong to let those expectations fall away, even for a moment? Ilva's eyes met mine, and something in her gaze melted. She didn't step back this time. Her hand, so close to mine on the table, trembled as she reached toward me. I could feel the tension in the air between us, and instinctively, I closed the distance. When my hand covered hers, she didn't pull away. In that moment, it felt as if every barrier between us had vanished. Marcus, her voice was a whisper, almost an apology, yet her hand turned under mine, her fingers entwining with mine. I could feel her heartbeat through her touch, rapid and unsteady. She took a shaky breath and looked into my eyes, her cold exterior melting away, leaving something raw and vulnerable. Her gaze fell to my lips, and I could see her resolve flickering, teetering between letting go and holding herself back. A part of me wanted to give her the space to choose, to step away if she felt she had to. But my other instincts, the ones that had been building over weeks of closeness, urged me forward. I leaned down, and when our lips finally met, it was a quiet collision, hesitant yet certain. Her cool touch was tempered by an intense warmth that radiated through me. We both paused, perhaps startled by how natural it felt, but then she deepened the kiss, and I felt everything between us finally ignite. It was as if I'd crossed into another world, one where nothing else mattered but the feeling of her, the way she fit against me as if she'd always belonged there. Her hands slid up my shoulders, pulling me closer, her body pressed to mine in an embrace that shattered the isolation between us. We were lost in each other, the vast emptiness of Emer receding as if it couldn't touch us here in this shared space. There was an urgency between us, a need that had been held back for too long. Her breaths were ragged, her hands clutching at me like I was the one thing grounding her in this moment. I lifted her into my arms, carrying her to the edge of the room where the ice softened under fur blankets, the space quiet and filled with nothing but the hum of our breaths mingling in the cold air. As I looked into her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen in her before, a vulnerable openness, a trust that both humbled and emboldened me. This wasn't just a fleeting closeness. It was as if she were offering me a piece of herself she'd never let anyone else see. The night unfolded slowly, every touch and whispered breath deepening the bond between us. We lost track of time as if nothing else in the universe mattered. And perhaps, here in this moment, it didn't. When dawn broke through the windows, casting a faint blue glow across the room, Ilva lay nestled against me, her head on my shoulder, her eyes closed, her face softened with a rare peace. I felt her breathing, steady and calm, and a sense of quiet fulfillment settled over me. But as the first morning light touched her face, her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief second, there was only warmth in her gaze. Then, I watched as reality settled over her, her expression shifting, a flicker of doubt clouding the peace we had found. "I shouldn't have," she began, pulling away slightly. "Hey," I said, gently turning her face toward me. "Whatever you think you should or shouldn't have done, I'm here with you, and I wouldn't change any of this." Her face softened, but the worry didn't entirely fade. "There are things you don't know, Marcus. I can't pretend that this is simple, that I am free to choose as you might be. I carry the weight of my people, their safety and their trust. Being with you, letting myself feel this, it goes against everything I've known." "Then let me help you," I said quietly. "I don't want you to have to carry this alone." Ilva closed her eyes, as if absorbing my words. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't easy," I replied, running my fingers through her silvery hair. "But I don't want to pretend that we can go back to how things were before. I know I can't. I don't want to." For a long moment, she was silent, her gaze distant. Then, finally, she looked back at me, her eyes fierce with a new resolve. "If we go down this path, there will be no turning back, Marcus. I may have to fight for what I want. And I may have to make choices that will test every bond one have ever known. Then we face it together," I said, a firm certainty in my voice. "Whatever it takes." A quiet determination settled over her, and she nodded, her hand finding mine once more. We stayed there, side by side, knowing that our lives had irrevocably changed. We would have to confront her world, her people, and perhaps even the frozen heart of Emer itself. But in this moment, none of that mattered, because we had each other. And for now, that was enough. Understood. Here is the continuation of the story, narrated from Marcus's perspective, and following the emotional turn of events where Ylva decides to separate herself from Marcus due to her responsibilities and her people's expectations. The narrative will capture their complex feelings during the separation, highlighting the deep connection between them. The next morning, I was summoned to Ylva's chambers for what seemed like a serious discussion. As I approached, the air felt colder than usual, a stark difference from the warmth we had begun to share. The guard nodded and opened the door, allowing me into the vast, shimmering room where she awaited me, her back turned. "Marcus," she began, her voice low, almost hesitant. It was unlike her, a crack in the armor of the Ice Queen. "Ylva," I replied softly, taking a step forward. She turned to face me, and I noticed something new in her eyes. A flicker of sadness, perhaps? Yet, as I held her gaze, her expression shifted, hardening into the icy resolve I'd first known. "I've come to a decision," she said, each word slow and deliberate. "And it's one I must ask you to understand." My heart pounded. I felt a deep, uneasy chill settle over me. I hadn't expected this. "Ylva, what's going on?" She held up a hand, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of warmth that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "You and we must stop this. Whatever bond has formed between us, it can go no further." I took a step back, feeling as if the floor had dropped beneath me. Why? What we share, it's real. I know you feel it too." She closed her eyes, pressing her lips into a thin line. "It's not about what I feel, Marcus. It's about who I am, and what I must be for my people." Her words landed heavily. She was Queen Ylva, a leader revered by her people, her responsibilities towering above all else. But after everything we'd shared, this abrupt turn felt like a blade in my chest. This can't be all there is, Ylva. You can't just push me away after everything." My voice came out strained, a fragile attempt to reach her. She looked away, her posture rigid. "I was a fool to let myself," she trailed off, as if the words themselves were too painful to bear. "I'm expected to remain apart, untouched by outside influence. My people see me as more than just a leader. To them, I am a symbol of their resilience, of their world. This connection between us would make them question my strength, my loyalty to them." Her reasoning hit like a wall, and I felt the frustration build. "So, that's it? You're just going to hide behind duty, pretend you don't feel this?" Her gaze turned back to me, sharp and piercing. "This is not pretending, Marcus. It's survival. My survival as queen and the survival of my people's trust in me." There was a beat of silence as we stood there, our breaths clouding the space between us in that freezing room. A part of me wanted to shake her, to force her to see that love, real love, was stronger than any duty. But she had closed herself off, her heart buried under that icy demeanor. "So, what happens now?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper, struggling to mask the hurt. Ylva lifted her chin, eyes cold and determined. "Now, you must return to your people, Marcus. I will continue to serve mine." I searched her face for any sign that she was wavering, some flicker of warmth that would break through the frost. But there was nothing. In that moment, she was every bit the unyielding queen, a wall of ice I could never hope to thaw. Feeling my heart tighten, I nodded stiffly. If that's what you want, then I'll go." As I turned to leave, I could swear I heard her sharp intake of breath, a tremor of emotion that slipped through her composed facade. But I kept walking, refusing to look back, knowing that if I did, I wouldn't be able to walk away. The days that followed were agonizing. I stayed on the planet, stationed in the icy outpost with a few other members of the team, carrying out our mission and preparing for departure. My thoughts were a storm, a constant loop of memories. Her smile, her touch, the warmth we'd shared amid the cold. But now, that warmth was gone, snuffed out by duty and expectations. I knew Ylva was avoiding me. She hadn't sent any messages, nor had she come to see me off. Every corner of this frozen world reminded me of her. The silence, the chill, the eerie beauty of the ice, all of it brought me back to Ilva. And yet, the warmth we'd shared had turned to bitterness, an ache I couldn't seem to shake. One night, as I wandered alone near the ship, staring out at the vast expanse of white stretching into the horizon, I heard a faint crunch of footsteps on the ice behind me. Turning, I saw Ilva standing there, cloaked in her regal, frost-lined attire. Her expression was unreadable, and yet her presence made my heart race as if for the first time. "Marcus," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. It was a tone I'd never heard from her before. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I wanted to see you before you left," she replied, her gaze flicking to the ground for a moment, as though searching for the right words. I needed to say goodbye. Her words felt hollow, like she was forcing herself to follow some invisible script. The hurt and anger I'd been suppressing surfaced, and I couldn't hold back. "Is that it, then?" I demanded, my voice rough. "You tell me to go, and then show up to make sure I actually do? Was I just some fleeting distraction for you, Ilva?" She flinched, just slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "You were never just a distraction, Marcus. You are more than you know." Her voice wavered, and I could see the struggle in her eyes. She took a step closer, her hands trembling as they reached out, but then she pulled back, as if restrained by some invisible force. "Then why?" I whispered, feeling my own composure crumbling. "Why push me away? Why do this if it's tearing you apart too?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the pain she'd been hiding. "Because I am a queen, Marcus. And my people, they expect certain things from me, things that I cannot betray. My duty is to them, no matter the cost." Her voice softened, and she reached up, cupping my face with a hand that felt colder than I remembered. "But you must understand, if I could choose, if I could, I would stay with you." The words hung between us, fragile and fleeting, like snowflakes that would melt at the first hint of warmth. I felt her breath, cold against my cheek, and the distance between us closed. Without thinking, I pulled her into a kiss, pouring everything I felt, love, anger, desperation, into that one moment. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, but then she kissed me back, fiercely, as if all the restraint and duty had crumbled away, leaving only the raw connection between us. For a moment, the world around us ceased to exist. The ice, the cold, the constraints, all of it faded, and it was just us, holding on to each other like we were the only two people left in the galaxy. But just as suddenly, she pulled away, breathless, a single tear glistening on her cheek. She took a step back, putting that damnable distance between us again, her expression tightening as she steeled herself. "This can't continue," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For both our sakes, it must end here." Her words cut like a knife, and I felt my heart shatter all over again. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and forced myself to look at her one last time. "Goodbye, Ilva," I murmured, my voice hoarse. I turned away before she could see the tears welling in my eyes, before I could let the pain consume me. And then I walked back toward the ship, each step heavier than the last. I didn't look back. In the days that followed, I returned to my ship and prepared to leave the icy planet behind. But as we lifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of me would always remain there, buried in the frozen landscape with the memories of what we had shared. Leaving Ilva and that frozen planet behind felt like a piece of me had been left in the cold, encased in ice with her. I returned to the hum of the spaceship, the familiar metal corridors and the control panels flashing under artificial light. Everything seemed muted. Every detail of the ship that had once felt like home now seemed smaller, insignificant, as if I was moving in a shell rather than living a life. Months passed, and while I went through the motions of my duties and completed my missions, Ilva never left my mind. Late at night, in the quiet of my quarters, her voice, her touch, her strength haunted me. The emptiness grew sharper, and I came to realize that I wasn't alone in it. My team members noticed the change. "Hey, Marcus, you still with us?" they joke, trying to coax me back into my old self. But there was no way to explain the truth to them. No way they'd understand that my heart still lingered somewhere light years away. Then, one day, The Federation command delivered unexpected news. The Federation had made an agreement with Ilva's people. For the first time, humans and her kind would work together on a shared interplanetary project, focusing on the exploration of new frontiers in diplomacy and research. We were to bridge gaps that had been closed off by the coldness of duty, tradition, and separation. They even asked if I would join the project. How could I say no? A new sense of purpose took root. This was a chance to see her again, or at least to work toward a shared purpose, to know that the distance between us had lessened, even if only by a fraction. It was months before I found myself on a shuttle to a neutral research station in deep space. My pulse raced as the ship docked, and I stepped out, heart pounding in anticipation. The station was large, bustling with personnel from every corner of the galaxy. But I knew who I was looking for, and I hoped she was looking for me too. In a wide, glass-walled observation room overlooking the stars, I saw her. She stood tall, elegant as ever, but her posture softened slightly when she spotted me across the room. I froze, unsure if I could walk toward her or if I'd collapse right where I stood. But she took a step forward, and I followed suit. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft yet resolute, like a thawing river breaking free from winter's grip. "Ilva," I replied, unable to keep the smile from my face. For a moment, we just stood there, sharing a silence that held all the things we'd left unsaid. It wasn't the same fierce, passionate reunion I'd imagined in my mind, but there was a weight to it, a quiet, unspoken understanding that what we shared hadn't truly ended. It had simply paused, waiting for this moment. "I've thought about you," she finally whispered, her eyes misty with a warmth I hadn't seen before. "I needed to see you, to know if what we felt was real." "It was real," I said, reaching out and touching her hand. "And it still is." She looked down at our joined hands, and a small smile curved her lips. "Duty binds me, Marcus, but perhaps not as tightly as it once did. Maybe one day, duty won't keep us apart." There, in the quiet of that observation room, with stars framing her face like a crown of light, I realized that our story might not end with the distance, the separation, or the impossible weight of our worlds. We were bound by more than duty now. We were bound by a hope, faint but persistent. Our lives would remain separate for now. But maybe, with each new project, each step forward, the barriers would fall, one by one. And maybe one day, we'd find our way back to each other without any walls left to separate us. As I pulled her close, if only for a fleeting moment, I whispered, "I'll wait as long as it takes, Ilva." And I knew she understood. Because love, even across galaxies, had a way of enduring. And so would we. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this story, please like it and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.